Welcome to Literacy Talks, the podcast for literacy leaders and champions everywhere, brought to you by Reading Horizons. Literacy Talks is the place to discover new ideas, trends, insights, and practical strategies for helping all learners reach reading proficiency. Our hosts are Stacy Hurst, a professor at Southern Utah University and Chief Academic Advisor for Reading Horizons; Donnell Pons, a recognized expert and advocate in literacy, dyslexia, and special education; and Lindsay Kemeny, an elementary classroom teacher, author, and speaker. Now, let's talk literacy.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Literacy Talks. My name is Stacy Hurst and I am joined by my co-host Donnell Pons. We are excusing our co-host Lindsay today. She is doing the thing. Actually, we're recording this in the summer, so she's probably presenting to teachers right now. Sometimes she's teaching when we record, so she wanted to be here. We'll let her engage as a listener after this episode. But we are very excited today. In fact, we have one of our guests. We're excited for both of them. One of our guests we have been wanting to have on since this podcast began. And so years into it, here we are. So we get to have today as guests Stephanie Stollar and Sarah Brown. And we are focusing on their new book, MTSS for Reading Improvement. And it was published, I know I got it in May, I want to say. Is that when it came out? Oh, it's so great. I'm so excited to talk about it. Yeah, I pre-ordered it. I was waiting for it. I'm so excited. It's a great book. So welcome, Stephanie. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you for being here. And just, I guess, to get started, if you want to do a quick introduction, tell our listeners about your background and what brought you to this book to create it.
So I'm Stephanie Stollar. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am supporting teachers and teacher educators to improve outcomes through the science of reading. My background is in school psychology originally. I have worked as a consultant in a variety of different ways, and I spent 12 years working for the authors of Acadians Reading. So MTSS is in my DNA, I guess. It's the way that I've learned about how to make change in schools system-wide since I was in graduate school. I'm still using what I learned in grad school many, many years ago in my work today, which is really fun to be able to say because so many people are having to make so many gigantic shifts in their professional orientation and practices. And I'm just really lucky that I had such excellent training. So I'm happy to continue to talk about those things even today.
Great. We benefit from that too. Sarah, do you want to tell us about your background?
Sure. Thank you, Stacy. I am also a school psychologist by training, similar to Stephanie. I've worked in education for over 2 decades now, and similarly to Stephanie, in graduate school was taught. I was in a program that really taught evidence-based instructional practice, and I've always worked in systems implementing what we now call MTSS. And since then, since being in districts, I've had the privilege of leading teams at the district level, the state level in Iowa, before I transitioned into the private sector, where I led professional learning and supported MTSS in schools with tools like FastBridge, which is a screening and progress monitoring tool. And then today, I consult also and I work with schools and districts to help make MTSS and reading improvement practical, actionable, really impactful, and to help schools make system level improvements in a quick amount of time, right? Because students are only in first grade, only in fifth grade once. And so we really need to maximize the use of each of those years. And so, that's a little bit on me.
Yeah, thank you. What a powerful duo. No wonder the book is so good. You guys have had years of learning and applying this. So the definition of an expert, right? And I know Donnell and I have talked about this multiple times. Donnell works mostly in the intervention space, but we've talked about that. How, Donnell, you talk about it, your son and how he went through grades the grades, but not really in a systemic way. Like every year you've said it was starting over, right?
Yeah, so this will be such a great conversation, and how marvelous that we have both of you here to have this conversation, because this really is where we can make a difference in school settings, right? If we're able to figure this out and follow the guidance and direction of some really great experience and put to practice what you talk about, then we can do the things that we all wish we could do in a school, and that is meet the needs of students who come in with maybe some different challenges, right? Diverse learners. And my son, because a lot of this wasn't in play at all, there was no chance. And so I see bright lights, schools that are implementing some, schools that have an interest. But it will be so great to have this conversation to lay out exactly, because it can be done and we can do tremendous work. And there are resources. It's just knowing about them and then putting them in place. I'm so excited for this conversation. Let's get into it.
Yeah. Okay, to start out with, and Sarah, you mentioned this, you said it like this, what we now call MTSS, right? And I think my first segue into this space, we were calling it RTI at the time. So maybe, or something like that, at least in my district, that's how it was proposed to us. Could you start out by talking about the difference, just for those people who may have initially become familiar with RTI, still use it today? What is the difference between the two?
Yeah. So, Stephanie, I'm really interested in your thoughts about this too. So, I would say it depends on the question. If you're asking the question as an academic or as a practitioner in a school, I would say, if you're asking as a practitioner in a school, the TLDR is there's not really a difference. The idea behind both is that we're using data to identify what we need to do within our school right now in order to support educators and learners. That's the same kind of foundational piece. And with both of those, we use what we call like a collaborative improvement process, where we're what I call it like fifth grade science, where we're identifying the need, we're analyzing that need, right? We're making a hypothesis about what the need is, and then we're putting something in place. The big differences lie. So if you might be in a school that's calling something RTI, but as you read a book about MTSS or you have conversations about MTSS, you're like, oh, that's what we're doing. And so in many practical cases, they're the same thing. Academically, where they differ is that RTI has really kind of started with and is around an individual student, and many times schools are looking specifically for individual student needs and addressing those needs. Whereas with MTSS, we really are looking more at kind of the whole child, thinking about both academic and behavioral needs or social emotional needs, and thinking about also systems level improvement, and in addition to what individual students might need. And there are lots of nuances within that. And I'll leave, like, Stephanie, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think you got it right. I always conceptualized RTI in the same way I think about MTSS, but that's not the way it was put into practice. It was very much what Sarah said about a focus on individual students. And that persists today. People say, I'm the MTSS teacher. This is our MTSS room. Here's our MTSS forms, right? And what they're talking about usually is just moving kids through tiers. So I had a little bit of an aha this morning. So I'm going to try it out on you and see how this works. So instead of educators asking, why isn't this student learning to read? In MTSS, we ask, why haven't we taught this student to read? Or even better, how can we teach this student to read? That's the difference to me. It's sort of zooming out from that individual student, put the blame on the student, see it as something wrong with the student, versus in MTSS, we are taking the ownership as adults to get the conditions right for every student to become a skilled reader. So that's how I would summarize the difference.
I love that. And you heard that insight here first. Let's just record that. That's brilliant. That will help me I explain it to my pre-service teachers too, because I think they're, as teachers, their default is how come this student isn't learning, right? But helping them understand there is a system in place. You can be the best teacher in the world, but that's not going to serve that student going into the next grade, or the students who might need extra support or structure to what their school experience is. And how are we going to provide that for them?
I do want to point out that schools, states, this one of the states I live in calls an MTSS an MLS, a multi-level system of support, right? And so in your, like, wherever you are an educator or an educational leader, like, it might be called something else, and that's okay. I don't want people to get too hung up on, like, we need to change everything in all of our manuals to say MTSS instead of RTI, or we need to change, right? Like, that's not like let's do good things for teachers and kids, and not get too bogged down by the semantics when they're not helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. And keep the thing, right? Focusing on what needs to be focused on. Just a little bit about my background with MTSS. I do feel lucky. I was in a district that really embraced it early on. And I started teaching in 2001. And I would say my district really started focusing on it probably about 2005 or 6. The model was pretty solid. In application, as you know, it varied from school to school. I was lucky to work with a team who we worked hard to understand it. We used Dibbles at the time. One of the things that I remember, I was telling you too before we started, I actually called a coworker that I used to work with all those years ago and said, "Oh, you know what? You need to read this book. We wish we would have had it then. So many things. The forms would have been helpful to just have out of the gate. We were creating those, the meeting structure. Like, you've done so much of this work for us." But I think, and you chose in this book to focus on reading as part of that MTSS. As you mentioned already, Sarah, it could be all kinds of things that we're focusing on. Math and helping the whole student. But I think where we were with the science of reading and the knowledge that we had at the time was not very helpful, not as helpful as it could have been with our MTSS model. I feel like we've made a lot of gains, but we were also limited. Well, as you guys know, there are barriers to implementing this kind of model, and I think we experienced some of those too. But what are some of the most common ones that you see?
Well, we've already sort of touched on one, and you mentioned the science of reading. One of the reasons we wrote this book now is because of all of the conversation around implementing the reading research in schools for the benefit of students. But I'm hoping we don't make a misstep in focusing on student by student, because a lot of reading improvement laws in various states, dyslexia laws in various states, are written to focus on individual students. And in my experience, most schools have too many students who need support, maybe not with dyslexia, but too many struggling readers or at-risk readers to respond to that situation one student at a time. And when our systems are bogged down with too many students who need intervention, we can't provide the student who does have dyslexia with the intensive support that they are entitled to and deserve. So I think, that's what we want to try to elevate and bring together and help people see MTSS as the framework for delivering the science of reading, and that these are not two different efforts in your school. They are not different initiatives. They're not competing. They should be integrated and brought together. That's my hope anyway.
I agree completely. Another barrier that I see frequently in schools right now is that they've invested a lot of time into, and money in many cases, into learning about the science of reading, which is absolutely necessary. And we need to understand how students learn to read and how to teach it. And they've invested in new programs and curricular materials to help do that. And then they kind of expect that, they sit back and they're like, okay, this is going to move the needle dramatically. And I work with a lot of schools across the country through my MTSS Data Academy. And leaders and interventionists and reading coaches come to my program every year really frustrated and disappointed because they've learned about the science of reading. They've taught everyone else about the science of reading, and their data aren't improving, and they're not seeing that impact system wide. And a lot of it is because, as Stephanie said, right, we're still kind of attacking things student by student. Another barrier, though, that I often see is that we're not making the explicit connections between here's what we learned as part of from science of reading, and here's what that looks like in a day-to-day in day-to-day practice using our materials, and making those explicit connections between those, and really supporting. That's part of the system-wide support of an MTSS, is that proactive support of identifying how do we help teachers be able to do this thing. Like, we're asking for a lot of new practices, and so to many teachers, this is all brand new, and so it's hard, and it's hard to know then what to try next when the first thing that you read about or that you're trying isn't effective, and so you might not have a second idea, and so I see that as one of the things right now that also comes into play in many schools who are making changes.
So you've both kind of hit on something, but I kind of want to pinpoint this because I think it's definitely a topic. And Stephanie, you brought it out, but we've talked around it. I think a lot of times schools feel overwhelmed, as you're saying, because the numbers seem so big. And speak to that a little bit here, because we do have, and as you're saying, Sarah, you brought in a piece too. So we've got a lot of knowledge now. And so we think that we just apply this and we're going to have great results. And then when that doesn't happen, we're surprised oftentimes. And then we feel overwhelmed because there's so many students. Kind of help us get an idea of, okay, so if that's your situation, then what do I do next? Because I think this speaks to a lot of places that I've been to and seen, and a lot of what teachers talk about. What do you do?
So so the first thing to think about is the pyramid, the MTSS pyramid that you think of with those three tiers. Those tiers are not intended to be about students. So when we hear schools that say, I have an upside down pyramid, right? We can all picture what that means. It means, well, I think that's what you were speaking to, right?
Yeah.
So we have an upside down pyramid with all these students who are tier 2 and tier 3 students. In reality, that's not what the pyramid represents. The pyramid represents the resources in your school. And so when we have large numbers of students who have needs, I'm not in districts where magic intervention resources are falling from the sky, like extra resources, right? They just don't exist. And so we have to look where we have the most resources, and that's tier 1. And what I tend to see in schools over and over again, that end up seeing a lot of growth, right? So one, it's about asking the right questions. So instead of asking which students need intervention, right, we're going to ask like where are our needs? And so then what are the resources that need to support those needs? So part of it is honing in on the right question, and then taking the right action next. And so we have large numbers of students, and we're going to look toward a tier 1 intervention first as something that we need to put in place in order to meet the needs of all. And then we'll absolutely provide tier 2 interventions and tier 3 interventions to our most at-risk students.
That right there. Okay, I just want to, folks, if you didn't hear it, please rewind because that was insightful. And then what are you going to add, Stephanie? I bet you've got stuff to add to this.
Well, I just think we set teachers up from their initial training program to think that they don't have the secret sauce, that the special ed teacher is the one who has the magic dust. Like, we literally tell gen ed teachers that.
Yeah.
When you have a concern, refer to the expert. So then we're surprised somehow when that's what they do. So people are responding to exactly what we have told them, what we've set them up for. But to me, that's at the heart of the overwhelm. And it relates to what Sarah said about fixing the gen ed instruction. But that's not what people think MTSS is.
Yeah.
People think MTSS is making a referral. People in these early literacy laws think the way to improve reading is to find the individual student and give the individual intervention. And when there are too many individuals, that approach just doesn't work. And yet people say, well, we've done MTSS, and so this MTSS stuff doesn't work. When I think the fundamental change that two fundamental changes that people have to have in their thinking is it is all of our responsibility for every student to become a reader. And that means gen ed teachers have to be equipped. I'm not pointing fingers at them. I'm saying everybody else around them in the system has to equip them with the knowledge, the materials, the time, the coaching, right? Like all of those, that's what we call systems, have to be in place. And then the second fundamental shift I would say is that people think they can get a different result by behaving in the same way. And this is way beyond reading. Like, I've been trying to get some muscle tone, but I have yet to go to the gym. Like, right? Like, it's hard to change behavior, especially your own. But that's what I see teachers right now, or not so much teachers, quite honestly, school administrators, thinking that they can just keep the same old practices and get a different result. If they even want a different result, sometimes I wonder if they're willing to make the investment in getting the different result. I also experience that people somehow think MTSS is this unattainable ideal. It's this idealized state that maybe it's okay in some other district, but we can never do that because fill in the blank. When the way I see it is whatever you would fill in the blank with, that's exactly what you should be surfacing and talking about. Like everybody has a reality, right? So what are the reasons why your first reading instruction is not lined up with what you have obviously seen in your universal screening data? Why are you not doing it? Is it something about educator knowledge? Is it something about collaboration? Is it something about time to plan? Is it something about instructional materials? Like that's just a short list of considerations. There could be others, but that's the work of MTSS. It's that team-based problem solving, sitting down together to collaboratively surface those barriers and write action plans to eliminate them. And we depict that improvement cycle as a circle with no end point, because we know this is a continuous improvement process. Like you're constantly circling back to, okay, we've got that up and running. What's the next thing we're going to do? And at some point you get into the conversations of, okay, our systems are all firing on all cylinders. How do we sustain this? How do we make this persist and last past the principal leaving or the charismatic lead, visionary coach leaving that school? How do we sustain this long term is like the last stage of implementation of that change process. And I think people just we have not been good about communicating that that's what this framework is, or that's too much for people to like wrap their head around. And so Sarah and I are attempting in this book to be clear about that's what we're talking about here, and give them tools to sit down and do it. So that's been our approach.
Implicit in what you just said, Stephanie, when you named your two things that schools need to do, I want to add a friendly amendment of a third that I think was implicit in there. I also think that schools, our leaders and our educators need to believe that all students can learn to read.
Yeah.
And here's what I think though. Like again, I don't blame teachers or leaders, frankly. Like I think most of them that I get the opportunity have never worked in systems where it's been true, right? So they've always had overwhelmed intervention systems where they've been trying to serve too many students. So they've never seen success from intervention systems. And so they don't really expect success from that. They've never seen student gaps between student groups decrease. And so they're not really, the sense of urgency to respond and proactively address those things isn't there because they haven't experienced it. This is a bit of a birdwalk story, but when I was in my internship year as a school psychologist, I was trained in a pretty non-traditional program. But I went into my internship year and so I already wanted to be working in MTSS again. It wasn't even called RTI yet back then. And my internship supervisor had me, I taught a group of first grade boys, a group of 5 first grade boys for the entire year who had reading disabilities. They had IEPs with reading goals, and I taught them using an evidence-based program. I had coaching on that program. And as I started, I was like, why am I doing this as a school psychologist? I'm never going to do this. I'm going to spend an hour every single day this year doing that, right? Like this is like, I'm not going to be a classroom teacher or a special ed teacher. Like, why am I doing this? By the end of the year, all of them were back into the general education setting for reading. Most of them no longer had, were being dismissed, or at least on just kind of consultative services for their IEPs. And I understood, and I value it as the most successful thing, the best thing that is brought to my career. But I got my very first year in schools full time, the opportunity to learn that it's possible. And most teachers haven't had that. And so I think that's something else that we really have to build, and we can build that strategically. There are ways to do it. And so we just build it. We don't just tell people, right, hey, it's possible, right? But we build that through our systems and through our conversations and teaming. So I think that's also super important for teams to attack.
Interested in diving deeper into today's episode and exploring more literacy topics? Join us in the Science of Reading Collective, where we host the Literacy Talks podcast chat. It's the perfect place to share insights, ask questions, and keep the conversation going. But that's just the beginning. When you join the Science of Reading Collective, you're stepping into a vibrant, dynamic community explicitly designed for literacy champions like you. Access decodable texts, sound wall resources, and professional learning in our AI-enhanced community, all brought to you absolutely free. Find us at collective.readinghorizons.com. Join the Science of Reading Collective today and be part of a movement that's eradicating illiteracy. That's collective.readinghorizons.com.
And I think you have answered this, but I'm going to ask it to put a fine point on it, right? What is in a successfully implemented MTSS model? What are the benefits for the tier 1 teacher, the general ed classroom teacher? A successful implementation, what will they see for them?
I think they will see payoff in student learning in exchange for their hard work. And they will feel supported. They will be supported. They will be supported. Their students will be supported. Teachers are always working hard. I mean, I've never met one who just phones it in. They're knocking themselves out every day. And I know many leave because they don't see the payoff for that hard work. And they think, they've told me, I'm doing everything my university professor told me to do. I'm doing everything that my mentor teacher, I observed and they taught me to do. I'm doing everything I learned in my district's PD. I'm doing this program my district bought me to a T. And yet I have half, 25%, however many kids in my class who I know I'm not teaching effectively. They are not reading. So what's wrong here? And natural human, response to that, it's them or it's me, right? And I know people have both responses, but many teachers take responsibility for that, they feel very ineffective. They're very discouraged. And frankly, many of them leave the profession because they are working hard, doing what they think they're supposed to do, and it's not working. So with the science of reading, we have the opportunity now with all of this movement and effort. People are excited to see that their hard work is paying off. So that's what we want in an effective MTSS. That's all there is to it for me. It's about the outcome. It's not a rigid set of procedures. In fact, you'll see some commonalities across MTSS models. People might use slightly different terminology, but the core components are always, the same: assessment systems, tiered evidence-based intervention, collaboration and teaming. Those are the bedrock foundation. But the flavor of that plays out in your specific school is very context specific. But it's all of that is like window dressing around that interaction between the teacher and his or her students. That's the meat of it. And the result of your MTSS, whatever it is, should be that teacher knowing and seeing and experiencing success for their students.
And yes. And I think feeling like you're part of a real team. So I don't mean the grade level team where you meet, every once in a while and kind of we're planning things, right? We're talking about things. But a team where you really feel like you have the level of support where you can be really vulnerable and you can say, I just knocked this out of the park today. Right? Like this group of students who I haven't seen make growth, like look at these data, right? Or look at this example of their writing or whatever that is, right? Be able to brag and you don't have to think, it would never even pop into your head that like, should I say this? Like, what if somebody else isn't seeing this? And I don't want to seem like I'm bragging, right? Or on the converse side, you could come and say, listen, I just tried that new vocabulary routine that we talked about and it bombed so badly. And then you can come back and again, and you don't think twice about that. And so I want teams, our teachers should feel like in a successful system, like it is a real team and that they're empowered to succeed together, to learn together and to really problem solve and figure out tough situations together too.
I want to extend that teaming idea to include family members, parents, community members, because in a successful MTSS, teachers wouldn't feel threatened or afraid or confronted when a parent comes and says, I think my child is a struggling reader. Something's not right here. Parents wouldn't have to go out and seek the instruction or the assessment outside of the district. So that's an area of partnership and teaming that's inherent in MTSS that we are not implementing. I think that's maybe a component of the science of reading. It's certainly been the instigator of the national attention. Parents have certainly led the advocacy around the change that we're seeing now, but that has to be part of the conversation. So it has to go beyond just the school educators, the professionals, so to speak, collaborating and teaming to get it right for kids. We have to extend that to parents and community members.
Yeah, those answers are so poignant because everything you just said is a benefit. And I was focusing my question on that general educator, but in an MTSS model, there are many roles that benefit, obviously. Like you mentioned too, Stephanie, parents are part of that. But those are the reasons people are leaving the profession. This is more powerful than I think people understand, that if we get this right, we are changing the profession. We're changing the climate. We're changing so much for students, which is why those teachers are there. Nobody signs up for teaching who doesn't care about their students, right? So thank you for answering that. And I think as you're talking and as I'm reading the book, I really have had so many thoughts, but one of them was this. We talked about assessment, and I want to talk more about that too. I love that that's the golden thread throughout the whole thing in a sense, because it helps guide us and keep us true and helps us to know when things are working well. But I remember in our school, and we did use the Dibbles assessment. I was highly trained in that, loved it. It's one of my favorites. And now Acadiant's version is great too. And Stephanie, I think you and I have talked about this before, but there used to be a report, and it was hidden amongst all the many other reports, but it was specifically about how effective is your tier 1 instruction in each class and grade level. And we have those conversations now, but back then it wasn't something that I saw surfaced a lot. So as a literacy coach, I did that, right? I'd have those conversations with the teachers according to this report. And there's a whole lot of other emotions involved in a conversation like that too, right? If you don't have that system in place to feel like you're supported and you can be vulnerable, in many cases, 80% of our students were not in reaching what they should be in that tier 1 situation. And of course, we tried to support as well as we could. Lacking all that we know about the science of reading now, we kind of fell short in some of those ways in spite of our best efforts. So I guess I'm saying that in effort to say, for those of us who've been in the profession for a long time, this book is timely just for what you guys have said too. The science is front and center. Here's the system we apply it in to get the outcomes that you guys have so beautifully described for teachers and most importantly for students. So that assessment piece, can we talk a little bit more about that too? What do you see as schools start implementing MTSS and really focusing on assessment and how that looks?
Well, I think you have to make good choices, to be able to build the kind of framework and interconnected systems that we're describing in MTSS. You have to answer certain questions. You have to know which students and systems are not performing optimally. You have to know exactly what to teach tomorrow. And you have to know in real time, is your teaching working for the students? Small groups of students who are being taught together, individual students. So those assessment questions and purposes drive the choices of tools that you use. And you really can't implement this framework without direct, what are called curriculum-based measures. You mentioned Acadiant's reading. Sarah mentioned FastBridge earlier. Those are both examples because they are specifically designed to be used in a database decision-making process by teams to answer those questions, specifically the screening and the progress monitoring question. We have to have different tools to answer that exactly what to teach next diagnostic question. But so if you are going to do a school-wide improvement model, if you're going to implement MTSS, you have to have the right tools for the job. You're not going to be able to answer the questions that you're required to answer if you have other types of assessments. So I think school leaders really need to be informed about that, especially the district leaders who are making those decisions. Again, not to be too harsh on teacher prep, but we don't prepare educators typically very well with knowledge of assessment. And so those teachers become principals and then they become district administrators. They are the ones choosing the assessments. And they don't always make the most useful choices.
I agree with everything that Stephanie just said. And once you then have those assessment tools, having plans for how you're going to use the data and how you will support teams to use the data, as Stephanie said, because we're not born knowing how to. And we're not coming out of prep knowing how to. And we don't have time and we're already trying our best ideas. And so we really
Unless Stacy was your professor. If Stacy's your professor.
No, you got it. I do have a follow-up question when you're done about that. But go ahead.
we regularly say, right, don't collect data that you're not going to use. But there are so many schools that I work with. So the state of in Iowa, they've been using the same screening and progress monitoring tool for over 10 years now. And I started working with a school district 2 years ago. And as we start at the end of the first year, they said, we are just so like, our teachers are so empowered by these data. Like, they're using the data all the time. And I said, well, you've been using this tool for like 10 years, right? And she's like, I guess it has been 10 years. Never like we are now. And so, I see that more often than I don't, that teams have some data. And in many cases now, more than ever in the past, they have some good data too, some high quality data that are intended for the purposes for the questions they have. But they've never empowered teachers and leaders and teams to be able to use it fully.
So I'm curious, because you've taken us around some really good topics. And with this book that you've put together, which can be so helpful and powerful, how do you recommend or envision schools using the book? Do you have some ideas? Because typically we have ideas about when we're putting something together that is this important, ways in which it might be most useful. What are some ideas that you have for schools?
Well, I think Sarah and I, as we were designing and writing the book, thought about a variety of entry points. So we want people to be able to start where they are, like, because it is a cyclical, improvement process. So we want them to be able to start with some tools, some forms, some guidance about those meetings Sarah was referring to, so they can reflect on their current data. They can start with whatever data they have about student outcomes, and they can dig into what are the reasons why we're getting these outcomes and what can we do to improve. And so I think there's multiple entry points. If they don't have assessments, if they don't have the data to be the jumping off point, then that's where they should start, I guess, is selecting a good universal screening tool, training everybody how to use it, training everybody how to interpret the scores in those team meetings. So, Sarah, do you have other ideas about starting place?
You described it perfectly well. We tried to provide, we've provided team agendas, team data protocols, as well as like both grade level team and building staff meeting activities that can help in those specific areas that locally in your school you might have the biggest needs according to your data.
Yeah.
I think the other thing we attempted to do is the first part of the book, the first 3 chapters, is kind of a crash course in the science of reading and MTSS for school leaders. Again, because we have not done a great job preparing folks on those topics, not everybody's getting professional development if they're a building principal or a district administrator. So it's like, that's meant to be a starting place, right? Like, if you just need some background knowledge about what this stuff is, then the first section of the book would be a good place to start.
Yeah. And you've both mentioned teacher prep, and that is the space I'm in, as Stephanie knows. And Stephanie, you've already helped inform what I do there so much. I am wondering, because I am teaching my students about the MTSS model, teaching them what the types of assessments are, how to administer, how to look at the data. And I'm not quite to the point yet. How do I teach them to collaborate in that area? Like, they're not working in the system yet. So what are some recommendations? Maybe a better way to ask it is, what ideally would a pre-service teacher leave the university setting ready to apply or know that first year of teaching? What else do I need to teach them?
There is the Joyce and Showers, the original instructional coaching researchers. I have an article from 1982 where they interviewed a coach, a college football coach, I believe. Don't hold me to that though, but I'm pretty sure. And they have they speak to comparisons of athletes and teachers. And if you think about it, right, athletes take their jobs really personally. So do teachers, I think, in many cases, and their success really personally. And they said the difference between athletes and coaches and teachers is that athletes never expect that the first time they do something, it will go well. And that the difference is that in education, we've acted like teaching skills were so simple that through a workshop or a videotaped lesson, or like one single kind of hearing about something that will be able to do it well. And then the last sentence, I use this quote in professional learning regularly and have people reflect on it. To the extent that we have conveyed that message to teachers, we have probably misled them. And that is so powerful. And I think that that's something that teachers need to leave believing, right? That it's okay if you now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, don't know everything. Like, knowing everything isn't the goal ever. Like, the goal is and so in order to continue to grow and support the learners that are in your classroom, whatever year you're in, we have to work together to do that. And then I think I would like to somehow empower them. And I don't know how you do this, Stacey, right? But somehow empower them also to advocate for that from their leaders, because teachers can't be expected to create the collaborative teaming and create the system on their own, right? We need to empower them, but they need to be empowered.
And no surprise, Sarah and I are lined up on this, because what I was going to say is I think the best that we can do in the limited time we have in teacher prep is teach them how to ask questions and teach them what kinds of questions to ask, like shape the questions that they ask and empower them to not be afraid to question what they see, and coach them, have them practice, give them feedback on respectfully, kindly, professionally asking questions, the right time for asking the questions and so on. So give them the frameworks like MTSS, like the collaborative improvement cycle, like the simple view of reading. Like, you can generate the right kinds of questions from those frameworks. And, in 2 literacy courses in undergraduate teacher training, that's probably about the best we can do. It's very related to what Sarah said. You do not need to be the expert when you enter your first year. You should understand that you're a beginner and you will always be a learner. That's part of being a professional. And you should not be afraid to ask questions. I know when I started in school or in my first job, I was extremely reluctant to admit what I didn't know. I thought everybody would dismiss me if I wasn't the expert with all the answers. And I learned quickly that it was much more effective to come into every experience with questions. So hopefully that puts some pressure off of you, Stacey.
A little bit, yes.
Well, and I think that it's hard. A lot of educators, not all educators, but a lot of educators were good at school, so they're used to having the right answers, and so not always knowing the right answer, which none of us always know the right answer. Educating, teaching and learning is about doing our very best with what we know the evidence base tells us, and then looking at what happens, and then trying, and then keeping going, moving forward.
Yeah, I think it helped me having the background of a literacy coach working within, I'll call it now, an attempted MTSS system, because it's the who are the people in your neighborhood kind of thing. I do tell my teachers, this is how, find your literacy coach, find the reading specialist, your speech and language pathologist. This is how they can help you get unstuck, or help you when you have a student who's presenting in a way that you don't know what to do. And I feel like that may be a good start too. But I know that as I read this book, I was already thinking about so many things I want to share with my pre-service teacher. We could teach a whole course on MTSS. We just don't have time. We have talked about a lot of amazing stuff today. I have 1,010,000 thoughts swimming in my head, ways that I'm going to continue the conversation in my own mind when we're done recording. Donnell, can you sum up some of the things that we've discussed today?
Well, Stacey, this has been a fantastic conversation and so many golden moments. So I'm hoping folks will feel free to go back and rewind and listen, because I had some ahas along the way. And just kind of recapping a little bit of that, one, Stephanie, you started us out with, and it was that idea of, with MTSS, it's the taking ownership, which is very powerful in many ways. Sometimes when we hear that, we think, oh dear, but really there's a lot of power in taking ownership of this learning. And then it's solutions based, which I love reframing. Let's think of it that way. That is such a great way to reframe it. Along the way, you guys have been so good at allowing us the space to say, I may not know much about this. I realize it's missing maybe. I'm overwhelmed. So there must be a better way. That has been throughout a thread throughout, which I really appreciate, because we're at all different places. Wouldn't it be great if everybody was experiencing a terrific MTSS system wherever they're working? But we know that just isn't the case. And so you've given us real grace along the way with this conversation to say, well, this is where I'm at, and that's okay. Loved that. And then I love that way, reframing the pyramid, because of the way that we sometimes look at the pyramid. Well, I know a lot of times we look at the pyramid, but I just also wanted to know if there are any thoughts. And you also gave us great ideas about how to approach your book, which is so terrific. So here's this tremendous resource. What are some ways that we can approach it? Knowing those first 3 chapters are all about, if you didn't know, get to the first 3 chapters. And it's good for administrators, for educators, which is so great, something we can all share. But what are some, maybe a thought that maybe we haven't covered yet that you might find very important for folks to know? Because you guys have been great. What do you think?
No, thank you. Thank you so much. My biggest recommendation to teachers and leaders now is to find your community. Having great podcasts like this is a great start, right? But I know lots of teachers and leaders who, and interventionists and reading coaches who are an N of one, right? They're the one person in their building and sometimes even their district who are doing this work. And I just think it's so important, because we're all learning, and sort of find a community of people who are going to rally around you, who you feel safe around, and who you can tackle and think about all of these concepts with. I highly recommend.
And maybe there's a person in your system, right? Like, I love that Sarah's suggesting, because we can all be so easily connected through the internet and social media and so forth. But within your system, there's probably somebody else who also sees opportunity for better outcomes for students. And so find that buddy, that friend within your system who you can have the safe, vulnerable conversations with. And then you don't have to be the only person wanting to move in this direction. You can have a partner in that conversation. So that would be my last tip.
Yeah. And I think even as a community, you can reach out and gather other resources too. Stephanie, I am familiar with your Reading Science Academy. I'm a member. That's one option. Do you have any other recommendations or suggestions for where people can learn more about the science of reading or MTSS? Actually, your book is pretty comprehensive, but anywhere else, what do you think?
Well, Sarah and I are offering a facilitator collaborative around our book. So if folks would like to facilitate the use of our book, the application of our book in their school, we're offering some guidance for that. That will include monthly group calls with us for coaching and support, and a little bit of that networking and community. And Sarah has another resource that I'm sure she would share.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm really excited about that. You can find it now just by on if you Google the name of the book, you will come to it. And then I have an MTSS Data Academy where I work with school teams over the course of a year to provide ongoing support around improving reading outcomes, using your data, using protocols just like these, including these, as well as kind of individual data coaching and resources that entire schools can have access to. Through that work. It's also a community similar to Stephanie's Reading Science Academy.
That is exciting. And we will be sure and leave links in the show notes to all of these things. So, what a fantastic episode. Not only a very scintillating conversation and inspiring, but also we're leaving with a lot of resources and ways to improve where we're at. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really are looking forward to, maybe we'll have you back in the future. We can talk about your next book. Hint, hint, there isn't one. I'm making any type of announcement. It's just a wish. But yeah, let's revisit this conversation. And I'm excited to hear about how people are going to apply what they learn through your book. So thank you both.
It was great to talk with both of you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode. And we hope you join us for the next episode of Literacy Talks.
Thanks for joining us today. Literacy Talks comes to you from Reading Horizons, where literacy momentum begins. Visit readinghorizons.com/literacy talks to access episodes and resources to support your journey in the science of reading.